How you living, Guardians? Once an Inquisitor here. It's another Strike Showcase. This is going to be a hero level Nightfall of the Glassway. I'm running my what I call Sunstorm Titan with the Loreley's Helm for extra survivability, double primaries for stunning champions, and running it on hero level difficulties because it's match made, and it's being a Nightfall, it'll last a little longer than a normal Strike, so we can actually see how it progresses and not just blow through everything super quick. That being said, Glassway is an interesting strike because we're going to be facing Fallen throughout the entirety of it, but once we actually get the boss to come in, it's all Vex. So it's an interesting kind of swap there. And with that said, this is a strike that even on hero level difficulty Nightfalls can provide challenge for some people. The boss room in particular can get pretty stressful. Having done this as a GM in the past before, I can tell you that it's quite a workout to do that in terms of for your guardian there, constantly running and juggling and doing things. So, in any case, the first section is a series of rooms that'll have what's what I'm looking for, barriers up that we have to kill all the Fallen to progress through. Remember, in Strike Showcase, I'm mostly talking about the strike as it is, not so much the difficulty of the Nightfall or Nightfall tactics, which is commentating on the strike and my mediocre gameplay, I guess you could say. And I encourage you to share your thoughts on the strike in question here. So, running Fireball grenades because Season 20 we can have 2 of them with the artifact, so I figured why not. I'm using the Season of the Seraph's Pulse that I always forget the name of for anti-barrier. It has Rapid Hit and Headstone on it, which is a fun combo. I like Rapid Hit and Pulses. I'm running a Le Monarch as my energy. So it is double primary, but with a bow, it kind of is like having a semi-sniperish rifle, right? And Le Monarch has Overload Stun intrinsic on it, so even though Season 20 has Overload Stun for bows in the Seasonal Artifact, if we don't ever have that in the Seasonal Artifact, Le Monarch will still stun Overload champions, and it's probably the best of the bows for stunning Overload champions, and bows are probably the best at stunning Overload champions, so you see where I'm going with this. Anyways, Sunstorm build makes plenty of sunspots, and I throw my hammer a lot, use my grenades. It's ability intensive, but you can also use plenty of weapons also. So this is the second of the 3 rooms. I call them rooms, little areas. And the second and third one will have a Fallen, a yellow bar captain type Fallen here, that uses stasis. So you have to be careful against them because they can easily trip you up, slow you down, freeze you if you're not paying attention to where they're using their abilities. So approaching the third room now, probably the biggest, but also has like the chasm in the middle there and everything else. Even though I'm not talking about this insofar as how to go through it in a Nightfall situation, the higher tier the Nightfall for Glassway, and the more you want to really play these rooms a bit more passive, you wouldn't be running around like I'm doing here in a GM, for example, in this room. Anyways, remember that the yellow bar will be using stasis, so be careful. So, well, yeah, my power weapon is a machine gun. It's Commemoration from Deepstone Crypt. Not the updated version of the weapons that have that kind of intrinsic perk on them, kind of like a minor wellspring almost. Instead, it's just like original Deepstone Crypt, but it's Reconstruction Rampage. I run Reconstruction Dragonfly on my Warlock when I use Commemoration there. So I'm curious, anybody who happens to watch this, do you swap weapons around? Like if you have a particular role you really like using, do you swap it between classes if you don't have multiple of the same? Or do you do like I do and kind of have the whole different weapon loadouts for doing criteria or doing specific things in the game for each class, because I don't really swap weapons too much. So as we progress through, we get some story about Clovis Bray and bringing in the Vex here to study them and everything else, kind of causing Europa's whole situation, and that's why the portal exists. And this opens up into this bit of a I guess you could call it platforming section. It's nothing tedious or strenuous. things. Some platforms on a bit of an angle, they're not all level each other. Platforms like this, Vex architecture in particular, and things on a weird angle, like to, in my experience for me anyway, eat inputs for jumps. So just be a little bit more careful with your jumps until you get a feel for it. I've had more than one occasion in here where I go for a jump, it just eats my input and I slowly glide, or I just fall right down because for some reason I just didn't register I wanted to jump, because maybe there was a piece of architecture imperceptible to the eye but has different collision and eats your input and yada yada yada. Anyways, we are definitely more than halfway through distance wise of this strike. It isn't a long strike to traverse necessarily. Here I'm gonna die to some weird shrapnel launcher damage stuff. I go from like over half to dead in the blink of an eye with only really registering one hit, but I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter. Those sniper vandals would have spawned in earlier. They spawned in delayed here, which is something I haven't seen in a while. So anyways, the whole point is to traverse through this chasm, which is over a bunch of radial area, to get to a pit with more radial area, and we're basically going to drain the radial area of this pit out so we can traverse and get to the other side. To do this, you have to stand and stay on that plate. When you activate that plate, it puts a barrier up in that doorway, so if your allies are not with you, they'll have the whole joining allies thing. So I like to wait for them all to get up here if they're pretty close, just so they're all here. So we're going to have shanks, heavy shanks, exploder shanks, tracer shanks, and sniper vandals to deal with. This is a great spot to have a healing rift or a well of radiance going, or perhaps one then the other if it's a well warlock, for example, because it makes standing there on the plate much safer. You don't have to worry about taking it as bad because you're healing. Otherwise, you want to pay attention to both sides. This is where the enemies spawn in from, particularly when the exploders show up. You're going to see I'm going to kill exploders that get really close, and it's going to kill one of my allies. But to be fair, the ally basically ran right into the exploder right as I shot it, so it probably would have detonated and killed them anyway. Not the biggest of deals, easy enough to revive. I keep forgetting to swap over my barricade to a towering barricade for cover, which can also be helpful in a situation like this. This is why I didn't use it. But at the same time, I also try to make it a point when I'm running Loreley's Helm not to use my class ability, because I need it for Loreley's Helm. It uses full class ability to give me the heal passively, you know, activating it without me having to do anything. So that's why I tend to not use my class ability on a Titan much, because of my extended usage of this helmet. Anyways, you don't have to just traverse this pit, you also have to kill all the enemies here. It's kind of more of the same, only there's also some servitors and dregs and stuff like that. So just be methodical. If you blitz too fast forward, some of the dregs and captains will stay towards the beginning of the pit and not really chase you, and then you have to go all the way back and kill them. So make sure you kill everything as you move forward, and you should be just fine. And this is the last area before the boss room. So in terms of distance to traverse and everything, it's not that far. We're, what, 8 minutes or so into this Nightfall. Granted, it's hero level only, I get it, but we're 8 minutes or so into this, and we're already at the boss room. Like I said, though, once the boss comes out, it's all Vex, including the boss. So we just clear out the Fallen in this room, and then the boss fight begins. I am doing pretty poor in my hammer throws in this strike, but it happens. So it's going to be Belmont, Transcendent Mine, and then a Transcendent Hydra. A really big Hydra and a small Hydra. They are dangerous, more so Belmont. The small one fires arc, which is unique amongst Vex, or rare, I should say. You hardly ever see Vex shoot arc. I can count a handful of Vex that do it from Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. Sort of neat, and it makes that one the safer of the two to be aggressive with. Belmont, with the torch hammers that they tend to shoot, are very dangerous, right? And it's a big boss Hydra, so it's extra dangerous. But on top of that, you saw me standing by a portal trying to whittle down some enemies. There are 2 portals that Vex reinforcements spawn in from, 2 minor portals, in addition to the major portal. And when it comes to having champions, they can easily, as you saw, spawn them in there too. We'll have wyverns or wyverns, however you want to say it, also spawn in there, so be careful. This is what I also like about Le Monarque, is that it's great for sending the Overload Minotaurs here, but it's also void, so if they're not Overload Minotaurs, it'll do great for having their shields burst and everything else. Anyways, these alcoves that we're in, that's what I call them anyway, they're not safe, as you saw. Overload Minotaurs can go in there, the smaller of the bosses will come inside of here as well. Wyverns will chase you into here, so it's not like you're safe inside of here. It's safe from Belmont, he's too big, but everything else can get in here. So the way it works is that both bosses come out in the very beginning. Once you send them away at their health gate, both of them, and you clear out the Vex, one of them shows up by itself. You send it away at the health gate. The other one shows up by itself. You send it away at its health gate. And when they all have their final third of health back or left, that's when both show up again at the very end. While doing this, it's like invisible gates, more or less, that determine when Vex reinforcements show up. So don't get too tunnel vision on dealing with the boss and not realizing that you have a boatload of Vex coming into support. Because the Vex are pretty aggressive, there's a decent amount of them, and there's 2 portals doing this, which is why you get a decent amount. In any case, wyverns are very dangerous in this area because there are death pits on either side of the ledges, all the way on the right, all the way on the left. There's a little ledge you can see there. Beyond that, you can fall to your death. So they like to do their stomps and launch you, so be careful with the wyverns. They also hit hard. Granted, I think it's Void Threat or something like that on. I don't remember the modifiers exactly, but my point is that even without that, their Warp Lance shots, which is what I believe they're called, they're just hard hitting. So wyverns are not to be trifled with, as you probably know by now. Anyways, while this build, I find myself, particularly in Glassway, being a bit more of a passive fighter, even though I could be ability heavy here in this boss fight with my hammers and throwing them and being aggressive on the enemy for clearing them out with the sunspots and everything. I'm definitely playing a more passive approach because I know, just from having done this as a GM and also having done this before as a Nightfall in general, that this can trip up a lot of random match-made allies, especially if they're not really stunning champions. I mean, I'm sure they are stunning here and there, I think, but I definitely am doing most of the stunning that I can see anyway, which, you know, makes sense, I guess, since I can't see what they're doing all the time. But anyways, I just try to stay alive because you'll see in a moment or so that I'll be the last Guardian standing, and you definitely don't want to be caught critical when this happens. So that's why I play a bit more passive here. Other boss rooms, I'll be a bit more aggressive in, but between the radial area, the death pits on either side at the very edges, the aggressiveness of the enemy, the AoE damage that Belmont can do, I tend to be more passive here for the builds like this. Because this is an aggressive build, but it requires you to become kind of medium to close range aggressive, which is hard to do when you have radial area pools everywhere. So I know I'm not really focusing on this as a Nightfall per se, but this is, you're going to see the power of Le Monarque here. I'm going to basically keep 2 Overload Minotaur champions stunned with virtually no effort, because all you have to do to stun them is a full bow draw. And Le Monarque's poison counts as overload damage, so I'm able to have both overloads in a stun lock, allowing for recovery time and everything else of my allies and everything. So really doing nothing more than shooting the bow, and it's taking care of these overloads, keeping them stunned, which is just why I think bows are the best for stunning overloads, and why Le Monarque is perhaps the best bow to do it. So with that said, we are approaching the final third of health for Belmont, which I believe means we're approaching the final third health for both bosses, which means they'll be showing up together again. So anti-barrier is helpful against this boss. Belmont has a knack for kind of always looking where you're coming from, it seems. so you want to be careful with that. And with the Hydra barriers that they have constantly circling them, as they both come out here now, it's definitely worthwhile to have some anti-barrier potential. That way you can kind of take up shop, be a bit safer, and just shoot at them regardless of what's facing you, because you'll pierce that barrier. In any case, I do enjoy this strike. I like the flip-flop of enemy types, and luckily for us, Overload and Barrier are the champions for both those factions, so you don't have to worry about having all three champions in a strike like this. But it's still cool to have the flip-flop. Kind of makes you think a bit more, because, how much arc do you run versus how much void and whatever else, solar, etc. I like having Hydra bosses that are aggressive like this, because they are rather dangerous. Sometimes we forget that Hydras outside of the Templar can still be dangerous. And I find the Transcendent Hydra, the smaller of the two, just while definitely the easier one to be up close and personal with, because it doesn't even really stomp you, I just find it interesting that it shoots arc-like shots at you, which, unless you have a massive arc, danger happening for the modifiers, makes it the safer of the two to deal with by far. Anyways, a fun strike that you have to be on your toes to the very end, because we're at the very end, but all of a sudden some Wyvern reinforcements showed up and they hit me hard. So I just appreciate when they don't give up the goods without a fight in a strike boss. Arms dealer, the final boss area, it's almost the boss is there and threatening potentially, but it's almost like everything else is the big threat. And here in Glassway, the enemies spawning in, the reinforcements are a big threat, but so is particularly Belmont. So I just appreciate that it's just threats from all sides, and that there's no real safe zone to be at. Because even when you're hiding from Belmont, it has a knack for just looking at wherever you're going and shooting you with really high damaging void shots. Anyways, with that said, what are your thoughts on the Glassway? I do enjoy it. It's a challenging strike. It can trip people up regardless of the difficulty of the strike, just due to the way the boss fight works. In any case, thanks so much for tuning in and stopping by. Consider subscribing to be part of future conversations more easily. And until next time, Guardians, stay frosty.